What's up, RC drifters? Welcome back to episode 3 of my RMX 2.0 upgrade series. On this episode, we're going to be upgrading the bearings in the steering rack, swapping out all of the spacers for aluminium counterparts, and cutting away the lower deck to allow for more droop. So alongside the bearings we are going to use to do this install, I've also got hold of the steering arm bracket made out of aluminium, as well as the two mounting posts to add some extra rigidity while we're doing this install. This isn't necessary, but I managed to pick this up cheap, so I thought, what the hell. I've also picked up a selection of 3M spacers bought as a kit from Yeah Racing. I've chosen these lovely red anodized aluminium ones. I'm going to be using these as shims and various parts on the chassis, as well as just adding a nice bit of bling to make it look a bit nicer. So with that all said, let's get into tearing this thing apart. First of all, let's take off the front bumper. Very simple. So let's flip this thing over and have a look at the bolts. We just take off these 3 2mm hex bolts and this whole bumper assembly will come off in one piece. And with that whole section removed, we can just put this to one side and move on to removing the 2 front shocks. And then all we're going to do is use this handy Yeah Racing ball joint tool and just slip it under the front there, and then with a little pop the right side, it'll just come off, and then we can just pop the bottom pass off and repeat with the other side. Next we'll use our 5.5mm box driver to remove the wheels, and then we'll pop off the hubs and get them out of the way as well. Just like with the shocks, we just need to pop off this one, and this one, and we can remove the hub. And with the hubs removed, we are ready to remove the bulkhead. On a side note, it is worth mentioning the RMX 2.0 RTR does not come with the spacers underneath on the front and rear, neither does the 2.0 Classic, which this was. If you check the manual online, you can see that a 0.5mm spacer is used underneath here. I used my spacers from the Yeah Racing kit and added them in, but you can also buy the MST parts online, easy enough, and fit that yourself. The washers were a cheaper route to go, but on retrospect it would have been a lot easier to fit the proper spacer. They both do the same job, but this is more fiddly getting these located. Next we want to remove these 2 2mm Allen bolts. There is 2 either side that holds the back of the bulkhead on. Once they're removed, we can flip the deck over and undo the remaining bolts from the underside. We also need to pop off the steering arm servo, and then we are ready to go underneath. With the chassis flipped over, we want to use our 2mm hex driver to remove the 2 outer bolts, these 2 inner bolts, and then these 2 inner bolts here to remove the front bulkhead. I'm also going to take the opportunity to cut out along this line here to provide more droop for the front suspension. With those 6 bolts on the lower deck all removed, we can simply just remove the front bulkhead in one unit. So with the front bulkhead all removed, we can use our 2mm Allen to remove these 2 bolts here, and the whole steering assembly will be removed from the bulkhead. Now that the steering assembly is all removed, it's worth noting that these long bolts go down through the main assembly here and bolt into the underside of the front bulkhead. It's fairly easy to work out which bolts they are because they're the only bolts that are that long, but it's worth mentioning regardless. And lastly, we're going to remove these last two 2mm Allens. At this point, it is critical to take note of the orientation of all the pieces to make sure that when everything goes back together, it all works out correctly. With the main rack removed from the arms, we can simply remove these sections and have a look at these bushes that we're going to be replacing with bearings. Now, if you're looking for a set of these bearings, you can just go into my description below, click the link for my eBay account and go and get yourself a set. Now let's get back to the video. Now, one of the first reasons we can see why it's a good idea to replace these bushes with bearings is this one has actually got itself jammed on the shaft. Now that is going to cause there to be friction, and we want this to be moving as freely as possible to get the best response from our steering and our servo. With a flathead, I was able just to wiggle this thing free, and then we can just push the bearings back into the arms once these are all removed. There's one each side here, and the bigger bearings press into the arms and the smaller bearings push into the rack. I'm taking care to make sure that as I remove things, I put the arms back down in the orientation in which they're all going to go back together. For removing the smaller bushes out of the steering rack, I found using a 1.5mm hex driver to be the easiest. The ones on the front you can simply just prise out like so, and then you can press through the middle and out the back for the other ones until they're flush, and then you can wiggle them out as well. Next, we are going to press in our upgraded bearings, and then it is simply following the reverse to reinstall everything. And just like that, our upgraded bearings are all pushed in, and it's already feeling a lot freer. When installing the arms onto the rack, you want to snug down the bolt just until there is no play and it's nice and snug, and then just back it off just a little bit until you've got a nice easy play. Just a couple of turns. You want to be able to turn it from one side to the other and it just falls nicely. See that one there, just snugged it up so it's tight, and then about a quarter of a turn, a little bit more, quarter of a turn at a time, and that there will be perfect. If you're using the standard brace, you simply just slide that back in like so, and then see how it's nice and loose, and then just reassemble into the front bulkhead. If you are using the upgraded aluminium support, you need to slide these pieces in first, making sure that the flanged head is facing the top. So being the opposite of the removal, we just place our arms up here, place the mount on top, and then drop our long screws down through, and then catch them into the bottom of the bulkhead, like so. With that all installed, we are ready for it to go to one side until it's ready to go back onto the deck. I will just say, if you're using the standard plastic support, you have to follow the same procedure for installing these screws. You simply drive the Allen head in until it's snug, and then you just turn it back quarter by quarter until the rack moves nice and freely. With this aluminium upgrade, with the inserts that go through there, you snug them down and there you go. It's all ready to go. This feels so buttery smooth compared to the standard bushes. I can't wait to see what that's going to feel like. With our upgraded bearings installed into our steering rack, we are now ready to assemble. Upon building the car, I did realise there was a lot of play in the front arm, and I'd previously fitted a 1mm washer in between the arm and the toe strap to take up that slack. However, it was still too stiff. I've changed that out for a 0.5mm washer. I find that gives me the least amount of play and it is still lots of movement. Now, if you are ready, you could just reinstall everything and be good to go. However, I'm going to take this opportunity to replace a few more of the washers, namely the ones on the control arms. So first of all, we're going to remove this. So our last 4 bolts will see our front arms and our toe straps removed. And with those bolts removed, we can just remove this whole assembly. So now we can take these all apart, taking care of where everything goes, and replace all of the washers we need to with some nice shiny red ones. My thinking is to start off with removing any of the plastic washers. Not only will they look great, but they're also replacing them with red ones that are made out of aluminium. They are stronger, there'll be less give, and everything will be more precise. And simply separating here, you can see I've currently extended where the bottom ball joint sits for the shock arm for the Yokohama big bores, and there is also, I believe, a 3mm and a 2mm on the bottom arm here. We're going to replace that too. As you can see there, that's a 3mm and a 2mm, and then here is another 2mm as well. So yet again, keeping everything in the same orientation as we're working on it, make sure that we put everything back in the correct place. To remove this lower bolt, you're either going to use your 5.5mm turnbuckle wrench on one side with a 2mm Allen on the other, or you can use your 5mm box driver, 5.5mm box driver if it will fit over. My one doesn't, but I've also got a handy socket set which does. And then simply remove. And then replace with our nice fresh, lovely. And then just using the Allen on one side, we can then snug down the fitting on the other side. To remove these, we need to use a 2.5mm Allen, but first we need to move this rod. Should just be able to slide off on one side, and just remember which side the spacer goes, and it's thicker on one side and thinner on the other. For me, it's thinner at the front. And with that all back together, we've just got one last thing to do. I just want to cut the deck where we need to for the extra droop, and then we can reassemble everything. So with my trusty junior hacksaw, I've trimmed off all of this excess, and I'll continue down and do more at a later date. But for now, this gets the front end done, and we can begin reassembly. So that's our lower arm assembly all installed, all with brand new aluminium anodized red spacers, as well as shimmed lower arms to give the least amount of play and still very free moving. Now we can take our front bulkhead assembly with our brand new bearings in our steering rack, slide them over the top rails, click that into place like so, and flip everything over and install those 6 bolts here, here and here to secure everything. With those all installed, we can flip this over and install the 4 bolts for the top rails. Now to install the 2 2mm button heads either side on this brace. With those button head screws all installed, we can go ahead and clip on our hubs. And with the hubs installed, we can move on to the front end. And with the front shocks installed, we can see now that we've got full droop and full use of the suspension without the bottom arm fouling on the lower deck. Now all that's left to install is the front bumper and the wheels, and we can take it for a test drive. And with the front end all overhauled, I couldn't be happier. I think this is going to transform the feel of the front ends and the steering. We've got a lot more articulation than we had before. Way more droop. And the steering feels so much freer now. I can't wait to see how the changes feel.